Castle Blackwood's granite swallowed the light, leaving its courtyards in perpetual gloom, even at noon. Formidable walls, scarred by forgotten sieges, ascended like a silent, brooding sentinel against the perpetually gunmetal sky of the northern marches. Within, Duke Alaric navigated its vast, echoing chambers with a solemn precision that mirrored the fortress's austere architecture. Every polished flagstone, every woven archway whispered tales of generations of duty, an unyielding lineage he was bound to uphold. His measured footsteps seldom disturbed the profound quiet. He stood by a tall, leaded window in the solar, the frigid pane a familiar solace against his fingertips. Below, the castle grounds presented a tapestry of manicured winter gardens and the purposeful bustle of stable hands. His gaze was distant, fixed not on the immediate scene, but on the shifting landscape of his own impending obligations. The betrothal to Lady Seraphina had been a fixed star for months, a meticulously orchestrated pact designed to solidify the northern territories and secure a vital trade route. Joy was absent, despair equally so. Only a stark, unyielding acceptance prevailed. A soft rustle of silk preceded her arrival, just before the chamberlain's discreet cough. Alaric turned, his expression carefully neutral, as Lady Seraphina entered. She was a delicate bloom amidst Blackwood's rugged terrain, her pale gown a striking counterpoint to the dark oak and stone. Her movements were fluid, her composure as unwavering as his own. She offered a brief, polite curtsy, her eyes, the hue of a winter sky, meeting his for an instant before modestly lowering. "My lady," Alaric acknowledged, his voice a low, resonant murmur. He gestured towards a high-backed chair near the hearth, where a reluctant fire wrestled with the room's pervasive chill. "My duke," she replied, her voice a hushed breath, barely audible above the crackle of flames. She settled into the chair, her hands demurely clasped in her lap. The ensuing silence was not awkward, merely profound. It was the quietude of two souls bound by agreement, not affection. Their exchanges were invariably concise, courteous, and strictly focused on the practicalities of their impending union: the wedding date, the guest list, the transfer of lands. "The master stonemason requires your approval on the new South Tower design," Alaric stated, breaking the stillness. He extended a rolled parchment, its edges faintly curled. Seraphina accepted it, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting moment. No spark, no tremor, just the cool contact of skin. She unrolled the plans, her brow furrowing slightly in concentration as she scrutinized the intricate blueprints. "It appears structurally sound," she murmured after a moment, "though perhaps the arrow slits could be slightly widened for improved defensive angles." Alaric nodded, a flicker of approval in his stern gaze. "A sensible observation. I shall inform him." Their interactions unfurled consistently in this manner, practical, efficient, utterly devoid of personal warmth. He respected her intellect, her keen eye for detail, and her steadfast sense of duty. These were essential attributes for a Duchess of Blackwood. Yet, an emotional chasm remained. No lingering shared glance, no spontaneous smile. Theirs was a partnership of obligation, meticulously planned and executed. As Lady Seraphina excused herself, citing a prior engagement with the castle seamstress, Alaric watched her depart. The door clicked shut, consigning him once more to the echoing silence. He returned to the window, the cold seeping through his heavy velvet doublet. The weight of his ancestry pressed down, a palpable burden. His father, a man of unyielding will and iron principle, had ingrained in him the paramount importance of the Blackwood name. To shirk his duty, to falter in securing the family's prosperity, was an unthinkable dishonour. He recalled his father's final words, whispered on his deathbed. "The blood of Blackwood is a sacred trust, Alaric. Never forget your purpose." And his purpose, he reminded himself, was to govern, to protect, and to ensure the continuation of his line through a strategic, advantageous marriage. Seraphina was a suitable choice, perhaps even an excellent one. She was well-bred, intelligent, and possessed an impeccable understanding of her role. There was nothing to fault, yet a hollow ache persisted within him, a silent counterpoint to the relentless drumbeat of his duty. He often mused what it might be like to choose, to feel the exhilarating tug of genuine affection rather than the steady pull of responsibility. He had witnessed it in others, the vibrant spark illuminating their eyes when they spoke of their beloveds. It was an alien landscape to him, a wild, untamed territory he had never been permitted to explore. He ran a hand over the cold stone of the window frame, his gaze sweeping over the bleak, magnificent expanse of his domain. He was Duke Alaric, master of Blackwood, and his life was a testament to order, discipline, and unwavering commitment. The quiet promise of his betrothal to Lady Seraphina was not one of passion, but of stability, of continuity, and for a duke, that was all that truly mattered. Or so he told himself, as the last vestiges of the winter sun bled from the sky, surrendering the castle to the deeper shadows. A splash of colour. The creak of wagon wheels on cobblestones was a familiar sound in Blackwood, but the wagon that trundled through the main gates this particular morning carried an unfamiliar cargo. Canvas-covered bundles, wooden crates smelling faintly of turpentine, and a long, slender easel jutted from the back, all tied down with ropes that looked more decorative than truly secure. Perched atop the haphazard pile, a young woman with a mane of fiery auburn hair surveyed the bustling market square, a wide, uninhibited smile illuminating her face. This was Alara, and her arrival was a splash of vivid colour in a town often muted by practicalities. She directed the driver to a small, vacant shopfront near the baker, its windows grimy and its door peeling paint. Within moments, the street was alive with her energy. She unpacked with a joyful efficiency, her movements fluid and purposeful. Unfurling canvases revealed landscapes ablaze with sun-drenched yellows and impossibly blue skies. Portraits that captured a fleeting laugh or a contemplative gaze, and still lifes vibrant with fruits and flowers that seemed to pulse with life. The air around her soon hummed with the scent of oil paint and fresh wood, a stark contrast to the usual smells of bread and damp wool. From the shadowed archway of his castle, high above the town, Duke Alaric observed the unfolding spectacle. He had just concluded a particularly dry discussion with his steward regarding crop rotations and tax levies, the numbers blurring into an uninspired grey. His gaze, usually sharp and analytical, softened imperceptibly as it landed on Alara. She was laughing now, a clear, bell-like sound that carried even to his vantage point, as a small boy tried to help carry a bucket of brushes, spilling half its contents. Instead of scolding, she merely ruffled his hair and handed him a clean rag. Alaric found himself leaning slightly forward, his hands clasped behind his back, a rare looseness in his posture. He watched as she cleaned the shop windows with gusto, her sleeves rolled up, revealing slender forearms dusted with paint. Then, with a flourish, she arranged her paintings in the window, transforming the dreary storefront into a beacon of brightness. A vibrant crimson sunset glowed next to a serene portrait of a village elder, his eyes crinkling with hidden mirth. Each stroke, each hue, spoke of a world brimming with emotion, a world Alaric realized he rarely encountered, let alone allowed himself to inhabit. Down in the square, whispers began to ripple through the market stalls. "A painter, they say," muttered old Mavis, adjusting a stack of linens. "Came all the way from the southern coast." "Southern coast?" scoffed Thomas, the blacksmith, wiping soot from his brow. "Full of free spirits and wild ideas. Wonder what she hopes to paint in Blackwood. Our grey stone and even greyer skies." Agnes, the baker's wife, however, seemed more intrigued. "Her landscapes, Thomas, they practically sing. And did you see the way she just laughs? So unlike, well, anyone else who's come through here." The general consensus was a mixture of cautious curiosity and ingrained skepticism. Blackwood was a practical town, its beauty subtle, its people reserved. This new artist, with her riot of color and open heart, was an anomaly. Yet, as the afternoon wore on, a small crowd began to gather outside her studio, drawn by the sheer vivacity emanating from within. Children pressed their noses against the glass, pointing at the lively depictions, while older townsfolk exchanged hesitant smiles. Alaric remained at his window long after the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple that, he mused with a faint, unfamiliar pang, were not unlike the bold strokes Alara had used in her own canvases. The image of her vivid work, so full of life, lingered in his mind, a stark contrast to the meticulously planned, emotionally barren future that awaited him. He was engaged to Lady Seraphina, a woman of impeccable breeding and strategic alliances, and their union was set in stone. Yet the cheerful chaos of Elara's arrival had stirred something within him, a hollow ache he hadn't known was there, a yearning for a splash of color in his own carefully constructed, monochromatic world. Pretending to admire art, the scent of turpentine and sun-warmed linen pulled Alaric through the studio door, a stark contrast to the sterile parchment and aged wood of his study. He felt a peculiar frisson, a blend of trepidation and anticipation, as if stepping into a different dimension. Elara, perched on a tall stool, a smear of cerulean across her cheek, looked up, her brush hovering over a canvas exploding with marigolds. Her surprise was momentary, quickly replaced by a bright, unguarded smile that made the meticulously arranged words he'd prepared for this encounter vanish from his mind. "Duke Alaric," she said, her voice a melody against the quiet hum of the street outside. "To what do I owe this artistic inspection?" A playful glint danced in her emerald eyes. Alaric cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the vibrant chaos of her workspace. Canvases leaned against walls, pots of brushes overflowed, and scraps of paint-splattered cloth lay scattered like fallen petals. I was merely passing by," he began, the lie tasting like ashes in his mouth. "And I confess, your window display has piqued my interest." He gestured vaguely towards a particularly vivid landscape, depicting Blackwood's usually somber forest, ablaze with autumnal hues he'd never actually seen. Alara laughed, a light tinkling sound. "Passing by, through the cobbled alleyway usually reserved for deliveries?" She hopped down from her stool, paint-stained fingers gesturing towards a stack of finished pieces. "Well, since you're here, feel free to browse. No pressure to buy, of course." He walked among the paintings, each a window into a world more vibrant than his own. He saw rolling hills under skies of impossible blues, bustling market scenes rendered with joyous abandon, and portraits that seemed to capture the very soul of their subjects. He felt clumsy, a dark, angular shape amidst so much color and life. He stopped before a large canvas depicting a lone, ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards a storm-laden sky. The usual muted greens of Blackwood were absent, replaced by deep indigos, bruised purples, and streaks of electric lime. "This one," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "It's powerful." Alara came to stand beside him, her presence a warm, earthy counterpoint to his rigid formality. "That's the old Sentinel, just beyond the South Fields," she explained, her voice closer than he expected. "I wanted to capture its resilience, the way it stands against everything, yet still finds a way to grow." He looked at the painting, then at her, a silent question in his eyes. He saw the subtle hint of challenge, the underlying strength in her easy demeanor. He imagined her, a small figure, facing down a gale to capture the essence of a tree. A strange warmth spread through him, a feeling akin to sunlight after a long winter. "It speaks of solitude, but also defiance," he mused, surprising himself with the depth of his observation. He hadn't realized he possessed such a capacity for interpretation. Alara turned to him then, her eyes searching his. "Precisely," she whispered, a sudden seriousness replacing her earlier playfulness. "It's about finding beauty in the struggle, isn't it?" For a moment their gazes locked, and the delicate facade of art admiration crumbled. He saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, a recognition of something unspoken that resonated within him. The air crackled with a nascent energy, a silent conversation passing between them that had nothing to do with paint or canvas. He felt a sudden, intense yearning, a hunger for the kind of vibrant, defiant life she seemed to embody so effortlessly. A customer entered the shop then, breaking the spell. Alara, with a quick, almost regretful smile, turned to greet them, leaving Alaric to stare at the old sentinel, feeling both exposed and strangely invigorated. He had come to pretend, but in the brief space between brushstrokes and shared glances, he had stumbled upon something dangerously real. He knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that this would not be his last visit. A secret joy, the scent of turpentine and sun-warmed earth, became Alaric's secret joy. He found himself devising increasingly elaborate excuses to slip away from his duties, his mind no longer solely consumed by ledgers and treaties, but by the next stolen hour in Elara's presence. Their meetings, initially cautious exchanges, blossomed into clandestine rendezvous. Sometimes he would arrive at her studio under the guise of admiring a new piece commissioned by a fictitious merchant, the guards at the gate long accustomed to his occasional, inexplicable forays into the lower town. Other times, she would meet him in a secluded corner of the ducal gardens, a forgotten path veiled by overgrown jasmine, where the air hummed with the busy drone of insects and the distant murmur of the castle. Their conversations stretched like slow, luxurious breaths. He spoke of the suffocating weight of expectation, the cold calculations of duty that had dictated his life since birth. She, in turn, shared tales of her restless youth, chasing light across forgotten landscapes, of the profound satisfaction found in coaxing form from chaos. He discovered a playful wit beneath her observant gaze, a surprising seriousness when discussing the fragility of beauty. She saw past the Duke's imposing facade to the man who carried the burdens of a kingdom on shoulders that sometimes seemed to sag under the weight. One afternoon, perched on a stool amidst half-finished canvases, Alaric confessed, "Sometimes I feel like a character in a play, every line scripted, every movement choreographed. I yearn for improvisation." Elara, mixing a vibrant cerulean on her palate, glanced at him. "And what kind of improvisation do you long for, Duke?" Her voice was soft, devoid of judgment. He met her gaze, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. To simply be. To choose without consequence, without the weight of an entire lineage pressing down. He watched her brush dance across a canvas, creating a sky pregnant with storm. You, Elara, you live in a world of creation, of pure, unadulterated choice. A shadow crossed her features, quickly veiled. Even creation has its limits, Duke, its boundaries. She set her brush down, turning fully to him. Your engagement to Lady Isolde. It's a choice already made, isn't it? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken between them. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest. It is a matter of state, of alliance. The words felt hollow, even to his own ears. Elara nodded slowly, her eyes tracing a faint crack in the studio wall. I understand. Duty, then. Her voice was quiet, but he detected a faint tremor, a note of understanding that bordered on sorrow. She had seen the truth in his old sentinel, the strength born of enduring, but also the lowliness of a life constrained. He wanted to tell her it was more complicated, that she was making it complicated, but the words caught in his throat. How could he articulate the sudden blinding vibrancy she'd brought to his monochrome existence? The way her laugh could chase away the shadows of his worries, or how the sight of her hands, stained with paint, felt more real than any finely gloved handshake. Elara picked up a small, unadorned clay pot and ran her thumb over its rough surface. It's a peculiar thing, duty, she mused, more to herself than to him. It can bind us so tightly, we forget what it feels like to breathe freely. But sometimes, it also offers a strange kind of comfort, a clarity in its inevitability. Her words, though seemingly detached, pricked at him. Was she acknowledging the unyielding nature of his fate, or was she subtly drawing a line, protecting herself from the dangerous current that pulsed between them? He watched her, a knot of longing and unease tightening in his gut. Their secret joy, however precious, was built on borrowed time, shadowed by a future he was bound to, and she, in her quiet wisdom, understood that perhaps better than he did. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft scrape of her thumb against the clay, a quiet admission of the impossible chasm that separated them. A shadow of doubt. Lord Montrose's autumn fete vibrated with its accustomed shimmering energy, a rustling symphony of silk, hushed merriment, and the chime of crystal. Lady Seraphina, her sapphire velvet gown echoing the depths of her eyes, glided through the assembly with innate grace. She offered courteous smiles, accepted well-practiced compliments, and, as ever, projected an air of utter composure. Tonight, however, an unfamiliar tremor stirred beneath her serene facade. Her gaze, drawn almost involuntarily, sought Alaric. He stood by the grand fireplace, a magnet for conversations he seemed to tolerate rather than engage in. His posture, usually so authoritative, appeared subtly bowed, his shoulders bearing an unseen burden. He nodded at anecdotes, offered brief, detached pleasantries, and his eyes, when they occasionally scanned the room, held a fleeting, unreadable expression she'd never witnessed before, a hint of longing, swiftly veiled. His customary aura of distant confidence had yielded to a vague distraction, an unease simmering beneath his ducal polish. He was physically present, yet profoundly elsewhere. Later, as the guests thinned, Seraphina found respite in a quiet alcove with her mother, Countess Eleanor, and her aunt, Lady Beatrice. "Alaric seems rather subdued this evening," Lady Beatrice observed, fanning herself delicately. "Perhaps the Harvest Council has been particularly demanding." Countess Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, merely hummed in assent, but her eyes, sharper than her sister's, met Seraphina's. "He has appeared somewhat preoccupied lately, hasn't he, dearest?" Seraphina smoothed a fold in her skirt. "He carries many burdens, mother. The Blackwood estates are vast." The words felt hollow, even to her own ears. It wasn't mere preoccupation. It was a fundamental shift in his very being. The Alaric she knew, the man she was destined to marry, was a pillar of steadfast certainty, his emotions meticulously contained. This iteration felt permeable. Indeed, Countess Eleanor's tone was light, yet a flicker of concern touched her gaze. Still, one hopes the wedding preparations will lift his spirits. It is, after all, a joyous occasion. Seraphina managed a small, non-committal smile. She cherished Alaric, or at least the ideal of him, the stability, the honor, the shared future meticulously charted since childhood. But the remoteness in his eyes, the almost imperceptible withdrawal, had begun to cast a shadow over that carefully constructed future. When Alaric finally approached her at the evening's close, his smile was practiced, courteous, a well-worn mask. "Seraphina, a delightful evening as always. You look exquisite." "Thank you, Alaric." She suppressed the urge to reach out, to touch his arm, to anchor him in the present. "You seemed rather lost in thought tonight." He offered a slight dismissive wave of his hand. "Just the usual administrative concerns, nothing of consequence. I apologize if I seemed distracted." His eyes flickered past her, towards the departing carriages. "I truly must see to my own departure. A demanding schedule awaits tomorrow." His excuses were flawless, his demeanor unimpeachable, yet she felt a chill. The warmth, the easy rapport that had always existed between them, even in their prearranged courtship, had thinned to a fragile membrane. He kissed her hand, a swift, almost perfunctory gesture, then vanished, a dark silhouette melting into the night. Seraphina watched him leave, the rustle of her velvet gown the only sound in the suddenly quiet hall. The nascent worry in her heart amplified, transforming into a subtle, undeniable fear. Alaric, her steadfast, predictable Alaric, was changing, and she had no idea why or what it might portend for their future. The edifice of their engagement, once so solid, now felt as though tiny cracks were beginning to appear, too faint for others to notice, but painfully clear to her. A choice for protection. The tang of turpentine, usually a comforting presence in Alara's small studio, now felt like a suffocating weight. Each brushstroke on the vibrant, half-finished canvas, a sun-drenched meadow bursting with life, felt labored, devoid of the spontaneous joy that typically guided her hand. The Duke's absence, rather than his presence, was a palpable force. His fleeting glances at the fete, the potent intensity of his gaze that had followed her like an unseen caress, had been both thrilling and unsettling. She was an artist, a woman who had meticulously carved her own path, yet even her fierce independence faltered under the potential scrutiny such attention invited. The whispers of the tongue, she knew, could be sharper than any blade, slicing through a reputation with chilling ease. Her standing was precarious. Her art, while celebrated in certain circles, offered none of the social armor provided by birthright or a husband. She had always prized her liberty, viewing marriage as a gilded cage, but now a flicker of apprehension began to gnaw at her resolve. The Duke, for all his unexpected kindness and shared appreciation for beauty, was betrothed to another. To let his interest deepen, to risk even a hint of scandal, would not only devastate her, but potentially jeopardize his meticulously constructed future. She grasped the gravity of his duty, the obligations that bound him. She could not, would not, be the architect of his ruin. A gentle rap at the studio door pulled her from her troubled thoughts. It was Master Theron, his usually jovial face etched with an uncharacteristic seriousness. A prosperous merchant, kind and honorable, he was a loyal patron of her art and a steadfast friend. He carried a small posy of wildflowers, their unassuming charm a striking contrast to the hothouse blooms favored by the gentry. "Elara," he began, his voice softer than usual, "might I have a moment of your time?" She gestured toward a worn armchair, her heart quickening with an uneasy premonition. He settled in, carefully placing the modest bouquet on a nearby table. His gaze, typically direct and admiring of her work, now held a hint of vulnerability. "Elara," he continued, choosing his words with evident deliberation, "I have long admired your spirit, your talent, and your unwavering kindness. I know you value your independence above all else, and I would never seek to diminish that." He paused, taking a steadying breath. "However, I also perceive the challenges you face in a world that often misunderstands women of remarkable spirit. My home is comfortable, my position secure. I would like to offer you the protection and companionship of marriage, not to confine you, but to provide you with a foundation, a safe harbor from the relentless currents of societal expectation. You would, of course, continue your art. My only wish would be for your happiness and to share my life with a woman I deeply respect and cherish." His proposal, delivered with such genuine earnestness and profound respect, was not the grand romantic pronouncement of storybooks, but it was honest, practical, and deeply affecting. It offered precisely what her heart, still reeling from the Duke's unspoken declarations, suddenly yearned for: security. Elara looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes, the sincere concern etched on his features. She envisioned a life with him, a life of gentle contentment, of shared meals and comfortable silences, of continued creation unmarred by scandal or speculation. It would not be the exhilarating, perilous dance she found herself engaged in with Alaric, but it would be safe. It would allow her to protect not only herself, but indirectly him. She would no longer be a dangerous distraction, a threat to his duty. The choice, when it solidified in her mind, was both a relief and a dull ache. She would be sacrificing a burgeoning, dangerous passion for a steady, dependable future. She would be choosing peace over peril, security over an intoxicating, impossible dream. It was a choice born of pragmatism, of a keen understanding of the world's harsh realities. She met his gaze, a faint, melancholic smile touching her lips. Master Theron, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, your offer is more generous than you know, and yes, I accept. A wave of relief washed over his face, transforming his features. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You will never regret this, Elara, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. But even as she returned the gentle squeeze of his hand, a small, rebellious part of her wondered if she would regret anything but this. The image of Alaric's shadowed eyes, the unspoken yearning she had seen reflected in their depths, flickered in her mind, a ghost of a future she was now willingly surrendering. The cold shock. The parchment felt brittle between Alaric's fingers, its edges sharp against his skin as he scanned the inventory of the northern granaries. His office, usually a sanctuary of measured thought and quiet industry, felt unusually stifling. The air, thick with the scent of aged paper and beeswax polish, pressed in on him. He pushed a stray lock of dark hair from his brow, a flicker of impatience crossing his features. Even the neatly aligned stacks of reports seemed to mock the burgeoning disquiet within him. A soft rap at the door preceded Thomas, his most trusted valet, whose usually impassive face held a rare, almost hesitant quality. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but a matter of public interest has reached the castle. Thomas offered a small, knowing bow, a subtle tension in his shoulders that snagged Alaric's attention. Public interest? Alaric's tone was clipped, his focus still half anchored to the figures on the page. Has there been a new decree from the capital? Or perhaps another rogue band of brigands in the west? Neither, Your Grace, Thomas replied, his voice dropping slightly. It concerns Master Theron, the merchant, and the artist, Elara. The name, Elara, struck Alaric with the force of a physical blow. The granary figures blurred, the parchment suddenly forgotten. A peculiar stillness descended, a prickle of anticipation, and something else, something cold and unwelcome, beginning to coil in his gut. Elara? He repeated, the single word a question, a demand, a fragile hope. Thomas shifted his weight, his gaze carefully avoiding Alaric's. It appears Master Theron has offered his suit, Your Grace, and it has been accepted. The betrothal was announced in the market square this morning, a rather swift affair by all accounts. The words, so calmly delivered, detonated a silent explosion within Alaric. Accepted. Betrothal. The air seemed to evacuate his lungs, leaving him gasping on a void. The brittle parchment slipped from his numb fingers, fluttering to the polished oak floor. A phantom chill spread through his veins, turning his blood to ice. Accepted? The word tore from his throat, raw and disbelieving. It was not a question, but an accusation, hurled into the silent, unforgiving space between them. The careful edifice of his composure, built over years of training and expectation, crumbled in an instant. Thomas flinched almost imperceptibly at the sudden ferocity in his duke's voice. Indeed, Your Grace, the town is abuzz with the news. A good match, many are saying. He is a prosperous man, and she, well, she will want for nothing. Want for nothing. The phrase echoed in Alaric's mind, each syllable a hammer blow against his carefully constructed world. He had envisioned her wanting for everything he could offer, not gilded security, but vibrant life, shared laughter, the freedom to paint with unrestrained joy. He had seen a future, nebulous and undefined, but undeniably hers and impossibly his. Now, that future was a shattered mosaic, its pieces sharp and glittering with betrayal. A wave of heat, scorching and furious, replaced the initial chill. Jealousy, a venomous serpent, uncoiled in his chest, its fangs sinking deep. Elara, his Elara, given to another man. The thought was an intolerable agony. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. The desk, usually a symbol of his control, now felt like an adversary. He shoved his chair back with a violent scrape that echoed through the room. "Leave me, Thomas," Alaric commanded, his voice a low growl, barely controlled. Thomas, wisely, bowed without a word and retreated, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him with a soft thud that resonated like a final, damning pronouncement. Alone, Alaric stalked to the tall, leaded windows, his gaze fixed on the distant, hazy outline of the town below. The very air seemed to hum with the news, the collective murmur of celebration for a happiness that was not his. He saw the winding streets, the bustling market square, the life unfolding, oblivious to the tempest raging within him. Elara. Her laugh, like wind chimes in a summer breeze. Her eyes, pools of liquid amber reflecting the fire of her spirit. Her hands, nimble and stained with color, creating worlds on canvas. All of it now promised to Theron. A guttural sound escaped him, a strangled cry of anguish and rage. He slammed his fist against the cold stone sill, the dull ache a welcome distraction from the sharper, internal pain. His carefully cultivated restraint, the cornerstone of his ducal existence, had vanished, leaving him raw and exposed. This was not the measured grief of a loss, but the searing fury of something stolen, something that had never truly been his, yet felt irrevocably so. The cold shock had turned to burning wrath, a dangerous flame igniting in the heart of Blackwood's usually composed duke. The grand ball and the loud declaration. The grand hall of the Theron estate effused a vibrant, almost aggressive gaiety. Crystal-laden chandeliers, ablaze with candlelight, showered dazzling light upon an expanse of shimmering silks and velvets. From a gilded alcove, musicians struck up a lively gavotte, their melodies weaving through the animated chatter of the guests. Elara, her hand resting delicately on Master Theron's arm, felt a disquieting emptiness amidst the celebratory din. Her dress, a confection of pale rose satin, seemed to weigh her down, an ornate cage for the wild flutter in her chest. Theron, radiant, embodied contented prosperity, his hearty laughter echoing as he greeted a distant cousin. His joy was palpable, a warm, steady presence offering a semblance of security she desperately craved, yet it couldn't quite dispel the phantom chill clinging to her heart. She managed a polite smile, nodding as Theron introduced her to an elderly countess whose eyes sparkled with a blend of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. The air, thick with jasmine and expensive wine, offered a heady perfume that scarcely masked the subtle undercurrent of gossip inherent in such gatherings. Elara tried to focus on the Countess's meandering anecdotes about a particularly stubborn prize-winning rose, but her gaze repeatedly strayed to the colossal oak doors at the hall's entrance. Each time they swung open to admit latecomers, a spark of apprehension ignited within her, an illogical fear that stole her breath. Suddenly, the music fractured. A single piercing trumpet note cleaved through the orchestral tapestry, silencing the violins mid-bow. A profound, instantaneous hush descended upon the room. All eyes, including Alara's, pivoted towards the entrance. Framed in the towering archway, a figure stood silhouetted against the torchlit night. Duke Alaric. He wore riding attire, not formal evening dress. His dark cloak draped over one shoulder, a faint sheen of rain still clinging to the rich wool. His hair was slightly dishevelled, and his usually guarded, cool eyes blazed with an intensity that made Alara's knees weaken. He appeared less like a duke arriving at a ball, and more like a warrior returning from a battlefield, his composure shattered, replaced by a raw, untamed force. He began to walk, slowly, deliberately, his boots resounding on the polished marble. He paid no mind to the widening circle of stunned faces, his gaze riveted solely on Elara. Theron's grip tightened on her arm, a silent, possessive gesture. A tremor ran through Elara, a disturbing mix of dread and a peculiar, dangerous thrill. When Alaric reached the edge of the dance floor, mere paces from where Elara and Theron stood frozen, he stopped. His voice, when it came, was not the measured, authoritative tone of a duke, but something deeper, more guttural, amplified by the hall's sudden silence. "Elara," he declared, his voice slicing through the lingering whispers like a blade. "You cannot marry him." A collective gasp swept through the hall, a wave of shock rippling from the closest guests to the furthest corners. Theron's usually jovial face contorted in a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Alaric took another step, closing the distance. I love you, Elara." His confession, stark and unadorned, hung in the air, a thunderclap in the meticulously orchestrated piece. "I have been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool, but I see now. You belong with me. You are mine." The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket. Then it shattered. A murmur began, a low, buzzing hum that quickly escalated into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and horrified exclamations. Ladies fanned themselves frantically, gentlemen clutched their wine glasses, and servants froze mid-pour. The festive atmosphere had not merely vanished, it had been violently ripped apart, leaving behind a raw, exposed wound of scandal and disbelief. Elara felt her cheeks flush crimson, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. Alaric, seemingly oblivious to the chaos he had unleashed, had eyes only for her, his declaration hanging between them, an undeniable, shattering truth, a storm of fury. The opulent hall, recently a symphony of joyful chatter and lute song, now pulsed with a silence so profound it seemed to hum. All eyes were riveted on Alaric, dishevelled and defiant, standing amidst the ruined remnants of Elara's engagement celebration. The lingering fragrance of roasted pheasant and honeyed wine now warred with the acrid stench of scandal. Elara, ghost pale, gripped Theron's arm, her gaze wide with shock and a creeping dread. It was Lady Seraphina's uncle, Lord Beaumont, his jowls quivering with barely restrained fury, who shattered the suffocating quiet. He advanced, his heavy signet ring catching the light as he speared a finger in Alaric's direction. "Duke Alaric, have you completely lost your senses? To desecrate such an occasion, to hurl such outrageous slurs before these esteemed guests. This is a direct affront to my niece, to our lineage, and to every sacred custom of this realm." His voice, typically a resonant baritone, had ascended to a high-pitched snarl. You violate your pledges, you debase your honour, and you betray the very crown you claim to serve through such reckless abandon. Alaric, his chest still heaving from his desperate ride and even more desperate declaration, met Lord Beaumont's enraged stare with one of his own. My honour, Lord Beaumont, is not yours to appraise. My vows— he flickered a glance towards Seraphina, who stood frozen, her face a mask of wounded pride— were made in ignorance of true affection. Before Beaumont could retort, another figure stepped forward, Master Theron's father, a portly merchant known for his hearty humour and sharp business acumen. Now his face was a mottled crimson. True affection? He boomed, his voice thick with indignation. What of my son's true feelings? What of Alara's free choice? You storm in here, a tempest of self-importance, and lay claim to a woman already betrothed? You shame her, Duke. You disgrace our family, and you make a mockery of my son's good name. He gestured wildly at the gaping throng. Do you see the ruin you have wrought? My son, a man of standing and integrity, made a fool of in his own dwelling. Alaric felt the full impact of their collective fury, a palpable force pressing in. He saw the cold censure in the eyes of the nobles, the buzzing indignation among the merchants, and the outright revulsion on the faces of the common folk who had been observing the festivities. He had not foreseen the sheer, unrestrained outrage, the immediate and devastating social fallout. He had only seen Elara, only felt the desperate need to reclaim her. I intend no insult to Master Theron, Alaric stated, attempting to infuse a semblance of calm into the maelstrom, though his voice still trembled with adrenaline. Nor to his family. My declaration is simply the truth, long suppressed. Elara cannot marry him because she belongs with me. The simple statement, meant to clarify, only intensified the conflagration. Lady Seraphina's mother, Lady Eleanor, a woman of formidable presence, swept forward, her silk gown rustling like an angry wave. Belongs with you? Her voice was a frigid whisper, more cutting than any shout. And what of Seraphina, Duke? What of your betrothal to her, sanctioned by the crown, agreed upon by both our houses? Do you discard your future duchess, the woman who will bring stability and alliance to your lands, for a fleeting whim, for an artist? The word artist was laced with venom, a clear dismissal of Alara's status. You jeopardize everything, Alaric. Your standing, your alliances, your very duchy. This is not some youthful indiscretion. This is an act of utter madness that will shatter your world. Alaric felt the sting of her words, the stark reality of the consequences crashing down. The celebratory atmosphere had curdled into a bitter brew of resentment and threats. He had tossed a stone into a placid pond, and the ripples were already becoming tidal waves. The stares felt like physical blows, the murmured condemnation a rising tide. He had come to claim Elara, to halt the marriage, and in doing so, he had unleashed a storm of fury that threatened to engulf not just him, but everyone present. The silence that followed Lady Eleanor's pronouncement was heavy with unspoken accusations and the dire weight of a future irrevocably altered. The ultimatum. The ducal study's heavy oak doors groaned shut, a sound echoing the previous night's spectacular ruin. Alaric remained in the room's centre, his travel-worn clothes from the Beaumont estate now rumpled silk, his usually pristine hair falling across his brow. Before him, arranged like an unyielding tribunal, sat his inner circle: Lord Gareth, the Chancellor, silver-haired and sharp-witted, Lady Isolde, his formidable aunt, whose gaze could strip flesh from bone, and Master Calin, the ancient steward, a fixture in the family for 5 decades. The air thrummed with a palpable mix of fury and disappointment. "You have disgraced this house, Alaric," Lady Isolde began, her voice a low, chilling reprimand. "Not merely yourself, but your lineage, the very duchy." Alaric's jaw tightened, the bitter taste of ashes in his mouth. He recalled Elara's wide, startled eyes, the collective gasp of the onlookers, Lord Beaumont's incandescent rage. He remembered the fierce, unyielding conviction that had possessed him, the certainty he could not, would not, release her. "Your engagement to Lady Seraphina is paramount to our alliance with the House of Valois," Lord Gareth interjected, his tone calmer but no less severe. "A cornerstone you have now shattered with your exhibition. Lord Valois is already demanding explanations. And Lady Seraphina?" Master Calen's reedy voice, though aged, carried the full weight of duty. "Her honour has been publicly sullied, her betrothal reduced to mockery. What do you intend to tell her, your grace?" Alaric scanned their stern faces, desperate for a flicker of understanding, a hint of clemency. He found only cold, unyielding censure. "I love Elara," he stated, the words sounding hollow in the sombre room. Lady Isolde snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Love? You speak of love as the very foundations of your power crumble. Your lands, your people, your future, all bound by duty and strategic alliance, not by some fleeting infatuation with a common artisan." "She is not some common artisan," Alaric retorted, a spark of his earlier defiance igniting. "She is irrelevant," Lord Gareth cut him off, a light fist striking the polished table. "The core issue, Alaric, is this. You have plunged us into an untenable situation. Lord Valois threatens to withdraw his support, leaving us exposed to the Northern Territories. The Beaumonts demand recompense for the insult to their son. And the whispers in the court, Alaric, those whispers are far more corrosive than any open accusation." The Duke felt the walls closing in. He had acted on pure instinct, a raw, undeniable need he hadn't known he possessed, a force that had eclipsed all reason. Now, reason, cold and unforgiving, was presenting its reckoning. "You have 2 avenues, Alaric," Lady Isolde declared, her voice devoid of warmth. "You will visit Lady Seraphina, offer a public apology, and reaffirm your commitment to her. You will sever all ties with this Elara, irrevocably. You will exert every effort to mend the breaches you've caused and uphold your ducal responsibilities. Or," she paused, letting the implication hang heavy. "Or what?" Alaric challenged, though a chill had begun to snake through him. "Or you forfeit your claim," Lord Gareth finished, his voice hushed but firm. "The council will be compelled to seek an alternative. Your cousin, Lord Marcus, has always coveted the title. He would make the correct decision, Alaric. He would prioritize duty above impulse." The words struck Alaric like a physical blow. Forfeit his claim? Lose everything he was born to, trained for, everything he held dear, for one woman? Yet, the thought of returning to a life without Elara, of extinguishing the fire she had kindled within him, felt like a slow, agonizing demise. Power, duty, respect, these were the bedrock of his world. But Elara had unveiled a world beyond those pillars, a vibrant, passionate realm he now craved more than breath itself. The pressure was suffocating. Every eye in the room was fixed upon him, demanding an immediate capitulation. He felt the weight of generations, the expectations of his people, the very fate of his duchy, bearing down on his shoulders. He could choose the path of least resistance, the path of duty and power, and salvage his shattered standing, or he could choose the perilous, uncertain path of his heart and face the prospect of losing everything. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken demands and the heavy scent of aged parchment and brewing conflict. Alaric felt a storm gathering inside him, a maelstrom of conflicting desires and terrifying possibilities. His future and Alara's hung precariously in the balance. An irreversible choice. The grand hall of Blackwood Keep hummed with an almost unbearable tension. Every noble family of consequence, every lord and lady whose allegiances shaped the duchy, sat arrayed in their finest silks and velvets, their gazes converging on the dais. An empty, ornate chair, draped in the crimson and gold of the Blackwood crest, awaited Duke Alaric. Lady Seraphina, a vision in cerulean, sat beside her father, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the entrance. A murmur rippled through the assembly as the great oak doors swung open, but it was not the expected procession. Alaric strode in alone, not in the ceremonial robes befitting such an occasion, but in travel-stained breeches and a linen shirt, his dark hair dishevelled, a faint stubble shadowing his jaw. He looked less like a duke about to make a pronouncement, and more like a warrior returned from a hard-fought campaign, the very air around him crackling with an untamed energy. Gasps, hushed and sharp, punctuated the sudden silence. He advanced, his boots echoing on the polished stone floor, his eyes sweeping over the expectant faces until they landed briefly on Seraphina's pale countenance, then moved on, as if searching for something or someone not present. He reached the dais, bypassing the ducal chair. His hands gripped the edge of the carved oak table, knuckles white. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. Lord Marcus, seated amongst the Blackwood Council, leaned forward, a predatory glint in his eyes. "My lords, my ladies," Alaric's voice, though rough, carried to every corner of the hall, resonant with a conviction that brooked no argument. "You are gathered here to hear my decision regarding the future of the duchy. My council has presented me with an ultimatum, and I have spent the last agonizing hours contemplating its weight, its implications." He paused, his gaze slowly traversing the room, challenging each face, each silent judgment. "I am told I must choose between duty and distraction, between my station and a woman who has irrevocably stolen my heart." A collective intake of breath swept through the hall, a soft rustle of outrage and titillation. Seraphina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, glistening. Her father's face, a mask of aristocratic composure moments before, began to sag with dawning horror. "I am told that to secure our alliances, to maintain stability, I must publicly denounce her, sever all ties, and proceed with the marriage arranged for me since childhood." Alaric's voice grew harder, a steely edge replacing the earlier introspection. "I am told I must become the duke you expect, the man tradition demands." He pushed away from the table, taking a step forward, his stance wide, defiant. "But I have found in these past weeks that the man you expect is not the man I am. My heart, once a cold stone bound by expectation, has been set ablaze. To deny this fire, to extinguish it for the sake of a strategic alliance, would be to condemn myself to a living death. His eyes, now burning with an almost feverish intensity, fixed on Seraphina. She flinched, as if struck. "Lady Seraphina," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "You are a woman of grace and honor, and you deserve a man who can offer you his whole heart, unburdened by a love for another. I cannot be that man. I regret to inform this esteemed assembly, and more importantly, you, that I cannot proceed with our betrothal." A stunned silence descended, so profound that the rustle of a silken gown, the soft clatter of a fan, sounded like thunderclaps. Seraphina's face, which had been pale with apprehension, now bloomed with a sudden, devastating flush, a mix of humiliation and a strange, almost imperceptible relief. Her father, Lord Grayson, rose slowly, his face mottled with apoplectic rage. "This is an outrage!" Lord Grayson's voice boomed, shattering the silence. "A betrayal of the highest order. You cannot simply discard your obligations, Duke." Alaric turned, his expression unyielding. "I am discarding a lie, Lord Grayson, a lie that would have bound two honorable houses in a union devoid of truth. The duchy deserves a duke who acts with conviction, not one who lives a life of quiet desperation." His gaze swept over the stunned faces, meeting each one with an unshakable resolve. "Let it be known, from this moment forward, that Duke Alaric Blackwood, by his own free will, breaks his engagement to Lady Seraphina. Let it also be known," he added, his voice dropping to a fierce, possessive growl, "that Elara cannot marry Theron. She belongs with me, and I will have her." The hall erupted into pandemonium, claiming her heart. A collective gasp, a palpable current of shock, surged through the hall, buffeting Alaric. Yet he remained steadfast. His initial sweeping gaze narrowed, piercing the stunned faces, cutting past the council's outrage and Lord Seraphim's furious grimace. It found her, a vivid splash of color amidst the muted courtly attire, bathed in the pale, waning afternoon light near the grand arched window. Elara. Her typically expressive face was a tableau of disbelief, lips slightly parted, eyes wide, mirroring the sudden chaos. Theron's betrothal ring, a simple gold band, seemed to scorch her finger, a stark emblem of the world Alaric had just shattered. His own heart, a frantic drum against his ribs, seemed to echo the silent plea in her eyes. He had gambled his life, his title, his very future, all for her. There was no retreat now. He began to walk, each step deliberate, resonating with the unyielding finality of his choice. Whispers, like a venomous current, trailed him. He ignored them. He ignored Lady Seraphina's heartbroken sob, the guttural roar of his father-in-law-to-be, and his own advisor's frantic attempts to intervene. His universe had contracted to this singular moment, to the woman frozen before him, breath caught in her throat. As he reached her, the very air around them seemed to crackle with unspoken energy. He perceived a flicker of fear in her eyes, yet beneath it, a nascent hope, a fragile wonder. Reaching out, his hand trembled slightly as he cupped her cheek. Her skin felt cool beneath his palm, but a profound, undeniable warmth began to spread through him. "Elara," his voice, rough and raw with emotion, yet clear enough to carry in the suddenly hushed hall, every eye fixed on them, every ear strained to catch his words. "I have just relinquished everything I was born to, my duty, my station, the very bedrock of my lineage. All of it, for you. A single tear, a shimmering testament to the enormity of his declaration, traced a path down her cheek. She appeared speechless, her gaze locked with his, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within their depths. I cannot envision a life without you in it, Elara, he continued, his thumb gently caressing her skin. The thought of you belonging to another, of my days passing devoid of your spirit's light, is a torment I refuse to endure. I know I've been a fool, a coward, allowing doubt and duty to blind me for too long. But no longer. The choices I have made today are irrevocable, for they are the only choices my heart will sanction. He paused, drawing a deep breath, bracing himself for her response, for the final, definitive step. He knelt, not a formal bow, but a profound act of surrender, of devotion. His eyes never left hers. Alara of Willow Creek, he declared, his voice ringing with a conviction that silenced every lingering murmur. I stand before you, a duke with a shattered betrothal and a precarious future, but I offer you my authentic self, my devotion, my unwavering love. Will you be my duchess? Will you claim this heart that beats solely for you and share a future, however uncertain, built on our truth? The ensuing silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of destiny. Her hand, trembling, rose to meet his, her fingers brushing his hair. He witnessed the struggle in her eyes, the echoes of her practical nature, the fear of scandal, the uncertainty of their path. But then, a profound transformation. The fear receded, replaced by a radiant, breathtaking love. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet clear as a bell in the stillness. Yes, Alaric, 1,000 times yes. The word was a balm, a declaration of peace and triumph that washed over him. He rose, pulling her into his arms, crushing her against him. Her arms encircled his neck, her face buried in his shoulder, her tears now tears of joy. The world might be crumbling around them, but in that embrace, a new one was being forged, defiant and true. He had claimed her heart, and in doing so, had finally claimed his own. A new beginning. The crowd's clamor dissolved, swallowed by the hushed stillness of the ducal chambers. The heavy oak door thudded shut, severing them from the world they'd just upended. Elara, a tremor still running through her, leaned into Alaric, her cheek finding purchase against the rough wool of his tunic. His essence, wood smoke, parchment, and the faint metallic tang from his discarded sword enveloped her, rooting her to the present. Alaric, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed emotion, what have we wrought? He tightened his embrace, his chin resting atop her head. We have claimed our truth, Elara. We have chosen us. His voice, raspy with an exhaustion that belied the fierce light in his gaze, guided her to a plush velvet settee. As they sank down, his calloused fingers, seasoned by reins and quills, gently traced the curve of her jaw. There will be fallout. My family, the Archduchess, the Council, they will not countenance this easily. Elara met his eyes, a familiar flicker of fear in her breast, swiftly eclipsed by a burgeoning serenity. I know, but are you truly ready for what's to come? He smiled then, a slow, breathtaking unfurling that chased the shadows from his face. More ready than I ever was for a life without you. He took her hands, his thumb caressing the bare skin where Theron's ring had once rested. We will face it, together. We will forge something new. Perhaps not the life I was groomed for, but one infinitely richer. A week later, the imposing grandeur of Castle Blackwood's Grand Hall, typically a monument to solemnity, hummed with a new kind of vitality. Easels now coexisted with ancient tapestries, canvases leaning against carved stone. The vibrant spectrum of Alara's paints, a riot of emeralds, ceruleans, and golds, seemed to inject vital breath into the austere surroundings. She sketched in a small notebook, perched on a stool by a tall, arched window, the afternoon light illuminating her focused profile. Alaric observed her from the doorway, a mug of steaming tea in hand. His morning had been consumed by terse, often heated exchanges with advisers and emissaries, each attempting to impress upon him the gravity of his actions. His title remained, for now, but pronouncements from the capital grew increasingly dire. Yet, watching Alara, a profound calm settled over him. He crossed the floor and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. Lost in your own world? She looked up, her smile bright. Just capturing the light. It falls so differently here than in my old studio. She gestured around the vast hall. It's inspiring, but also a little overwhelming. You'll master it, he said, his gaze sweeping over the burgeoning collection of her work. You already are. He took her hand, his touch warm and steadying. The Archduchess has sent another missive, less a plea, more an ultimatum this time. Alara's smile faltered. Are you certain? Are you truly certain you don't regret it? All of this? She gestured vaguely, encompassing both the opulent castle and the precariousness of their situation. Alaric knelt before her, his gaze unwavering. Alara, look at me. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the delicate line of her cheekbones. My life, before you, was a meticulously constructed cage. I believed it was my duty, my destiny. But it was hollow. You revealed what it meant to truly live, to feel. This disarray, this uncertainty, it is the cost of my liberation, and it is a price I pay gladly, each and every day, for the joy of your presence. He rose, gently drawing her to her feet. We may not dwell in this castle forever. My lands, my holdings, they might be forfeit, but we will find our own haven, a cottage by the sea, a studio in a bustling town. Wherever we go, Alara, we will build a life together, one filled with paint and laughter and no more unspoken truths. He led her to the window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished stone floor. Beyond the castle walls, the ducal lands stretched out, verdant and expansive, beneath a sky painted with hues of rose and gold. The future was nebulous, veiled by the unknown repercussions of their audacious declaration. But standing there, hand in hand, with the scent of oil paint and the promise of a shared future, Alaric felt a surge of hope, vibrant and undeniable. The world might rage against them, but within the sanctuary of their shared love, a new beginning had already taken root.